Hi, I'm Dan, and welcome to my review of Cloak and Dagger Season 2, Episode 4, Rabbit Hole. Going right into it, like Alice in Wonderland. Alright, spoiler warning for this episode. It was a really good one. I think it's probably my favorite one of the season so far. We really break this episode down into a sequence with Tandy and a sequence with Tyrone, as Tandy goes into Tyrone via his dark vortex, dark matter thing, where she goes and a mission into his dark vortex to save Mayhem. There's a lot of weird words happening here. Basically, she thinks they need Mayhem in order to save the girls, so she goes on a mission into his sort of like limbo-y space. Overall, I liked this sequence quite a bit, but it is something that I still struggle with a little bit about with this show, where it is like the mixture of like the grounded storytelling and then like the really woo storytelling, where I'm like, yeah, okay, I like their dream sequences and I can like get into these ideas that they're going into these meditative states and things, but like when you go into this like whole other world that they're actually physically going into, and like there are almost no rules and things are just going crazy, it does take me a little bit to realign myself, because the thing is that's troubling about dream sequences, and this isn't even really a dream sequence, but something like this, fantastical sequences, is that it will feel like maybe it has no stakes, or like the writers just gonna write whatever they want because there are no rules. I will point out, obviously, they had one rule, which is that she couldn't use her powers, and it seems like that affected Ty's ability to use his own powers too, which was interesting. So, like, are they literally going to limbo? Like a facsimile of limbo? He is able to have this ability where he can bring people into limbo because he fell in water and there was a science experiment gone wrong, and that's kind of, I mean, obviously all superpowers are crazy and don't make any sense, but that's just like a whole other level of crazy. But I guess the whole idea is they hit into some magical energy that's next level. I just have to admit and accept that this show is pretty magic-y. But that is a tough thing to be like, oh yes, she's not just going into like a dark area, she's going into like a spiritual dark area, which is interesting. The thing is, beyond the like hurdles for myself with that, the important thing here is that we got some really interesting character moments and interesting cinematography and imagery. I especially loved all the ponchos that Connors was setting up out of his like deranged fear of Ty, which I'm really excited to see what they do with Connors next week. Having spent so much time in this limbo-y space and having built up his fear of Ty this whole time, that's exciting to see that. Meanwhile, so we have Tandy finding Mayhem, and they're sort of interesting back and forth. I will say in general, I'm interested in the fact that Mayhem is a lot less like overtly villainous this season than I was expecting. I don't know if she'll go down a darker path, but I think they're keeping her in this sort of middle space where like, yeah, okay, she shouldn't kill Connors. That will help Ty to have Connors, but also like totally kill Connors. I understand that. I think they're keeping her in this space because they want Tandy to be influenced by her, and they want Tandy to be drawn into her madness in a way. Which I like seeing that a little bit this episode. And I really like the whole sequence in the record shop. The art that they picked and like the imagery of it all worked really well. I thought that was a great like fantastical dream sequence idea of having, all of these missing girls have their own sort of stories to tell. And then they're sort of captured through music and through art, and especially Tandy going through her records and the shrink-wrapped memories, the memories he's, never fully opened before. I thought that was really cool. At the same time, the one thing I will say about this, as powerful as it was for her to have to relive those memories, and as tough as it was, and it was heartbreaking and interesting to watch, the one thing I will say is I feel like we didn't necessarily get a whole lot of new information out of it. It felt like we knew that the father was terrible. Yes, seeing it more for her really affects her more. As an audience, it affects us more. But I guess maybe if you're supposed to say what's the big takeaway, what's the forward momentum for the character, is the thing that she got to a pretty substantial age where she was sort of ignoring it and keeping it back, and she went out the door instead of dealing with it and trying to help her mom. And I think that is supposed to be the thing that really drives her. So I'm sort of talking myself out of it that maybe, maybe there is sort of progression here. But yeah, it was a little bit of a thing where it's like, I'm really interested in this, but like, is it moving things forward? I don't know. And maybe it is. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. But ultimately, Tandy got sort of lost in all these records and these memories of herself, and that's what let Mayhem get to Connors, and Tandy had to use her abilities and stop Mayhem, which ultimately is what set Connors free, and Mayhem is still stuck in the Void area. So that's fascinating. We'll see when she pops back up, but right now we have Connors as our big villain for next week, which I'm excited about. There's a lot of stakes built in that, a lot of emotional stakes, which is really cool. And I will say, as far as the action goes, I think that the whole sequence with Mayhem and Tandy and Connors was one of their better sequences. That was fun to watch, and I hope that they sort of keep that momentum going. Meanwhile, back in the land of the living, we have Tyrone in deep doo-doo as the gangs are coming after him and his mother because they notice, you remember him, they notice him from his wanted posters, they go after his last known address, his mom's there, so he has to get his mom, and he doesn't have his powers. So that leads to a whole sequence of trying to escape them and trying to escape the kid that Tyrone actually saved in the first place. This sort of leading into lots of interesting stuff between Tyrone and his mother as they sort of come to grips with who each other are. I like that they're building his mother up more this season, that there's something going on, a sort of a side story there with what she's looking into with her files and everything. I'm not really sure what's going on with that yet. And it also led to them escaping to this convent that at least this whole story about the, quote unquote vampire nuns. And I loved how that whole sequence went where it cut between him telling the story of, the early sex trafficking in New Orleans and then Mayhem talking about what's happening now and how it's gone now. The more I think about this whole sex trafficking storyline, the more I feel like, man, it really makes sense for the message of the show and sort of the social awareness that it's trying to create, because it really does, it also ties into the messages and the characters that they created, both with Tandy and her sort of fighting for women and wanting to stand up for women and mistreatment of women, but also for Tyrone and how we're sort of tackling modern slavery, and also how, the women of color are the ones who are the most forgotten. So I think that really ties things in a nice way, and sort of how the way that they did that whole back and forth, I thought was a really intense and interesting sequence. Ultimately, to protect his mother, Tyrone does the really hard thing of calling the cops to come to take him in so that, the gangs leave him alone. But he is willing to give himself in. And it was really intense and high stakes of that fear building of he doesn't trust the cops to just take him peacefully, even though he isn't going to do anything. And I think that was a really powerful moment and a really intense sequence. And then, of course, it all ends with, Tandy bursting out and, Connors getting away. So it was a really nice culmination of an episode. Everything's sort of coming together as we get interesting character moments, interesting action, higher stakes this episode. And I just think that the season is really off to a great start. And, eventually maybe I'll get over all these supernatural things. But let me know what you guys think of these more dream sequency episodes and the fantastical sequences. That's it for this week's Cloak and Dagger video, but be sure to check back at all my past Cloak and Dagger content. I also have some content for the 100, some content for In the Dark, so much more exciting stuff coming. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you're doing okay.